Okay, so let's dive into the next chapter. There we go. Need your eyes on me. We're ready to go. So it just happened. He just pulled Evan up behind him on the horse to get out of there. A hand grasped Evan's ankle like an iron claw, jerking him backward, nearly off the horse. The horse stumbled in the slippery grass and whinnied in fright. Uncle Morgan twisted in the saddle, and with a blow to the pursuer's head, so he just went, kicked the guy in the head, he freed Evan. The horse sprang forward, and the sound of cursing grew faint in the darkness behind them. By God's breath, I swear we'll find you. We'll track you down. We'll have revenge.
Vikings.
Lightning etched the western sky again, followed quickly by the deafening thunderclap. With his one brief glimpse of the hills, Uncle Morgan jerked the horse's lead and spurred him toward the woods of northern Carmel. Evan drifted in and out of the wakeful world, dazed and unaware. His mouth stung, and blood flows hot and thick from the raw wound. It choked him as it filled his throat and spilled over his lips. Where were they going? Dizziness engulfed him. It took all his strength to keep his hands locked around his uncle's waist. His uncle kept the horse at a gallop for nearly a league, then doubled back on his tracks. They rode through a stream for another half league, then up the opposite bank, as Uncle Morgan frantically used every trick he knew to throw off the trackers who would surely follow at daybreak. Back in the stream they rode. Cold, dark water up to the horse's belly, swirled around their knees. Later, they rode northeast toward the wild hills. Evan rested his head on his uncle's back, the rain roaring in his ears like a rushing waterfall. They followed a dark, overgrown trail. Thickets brushed against them, and soon Evan's drenched tunic clung to his ribs. Uncle Morgan slowed the horse to a walk, stopping now and then to peer into the darkness ahead. Once he made the horse turn back and retrace his steps till they regained the northeastern trail. So in other words, he's just going all over the place. He's like, run the horse over here, turn back, run on the same track, go in the water for a while, run over here, do a quick circle, come back over here. Because he knows the next day, they're going to be trying to track him. So he's trying to make all of his trails like crazy confusing so they can't find him. Thus they rode long into the night, or so it seemed to Evan, who had lost all sense of time. Cautiously riding forward under the moonless sky, they sometimes doubled back and then rode forward again, often losing the trail and then finding it. Once it seemed to Evan that they rode along a narrow track no wider than a deer path, hugging the edge of a deep ravine. Evan closed his eyes, for the sight made his head reel. So in other words, they were going on this path that was like this big, and right next to him there was a cliff. And so he looked over and was like, whoa, whoa. Okay, I can't look at that. Because he was so high, and he's lost all blood, so he's obviously struggling. Finally, when his arms ached so much that he felt sure he could no longer hold on, Uncle Morgan pulled the reins tight. Whoa! The hoofbeats, squishing in the wet earth again, slowed from a trot to a walk. The horse halted, and then there was only the sound of rain dripping off the branches overhead. Take heart, Evan, his uncle said. We are safe for the night. But as Evan slipped to the ground, his knees buckled and he fell heavily. The blackness of the forest became the blackness of a dreamless sleep. So essentially, he tried to get off the horse and just went, boom, just fell down, just passed out. He was out. When Evan woke, it seemed much later, perhaps the hour before daybreak. He was not sure. His head pounded, and he felt that he had a devil sickness in his stomach. He shivered, his teeth chattered behind his control. He opened his eyes and saw Uncle Morgan on one knee beside him, the damp walls of a cave glistening at his back. "'Tis a hard task starting a fire with wet kindling," his uncle said apologetically, nodding toward a small pile of twigs and branches, flickering weakly before them. "I knew of this cave when I was a boy," Uncle Morgan explained. It made a safe haven for me when I wanted to skip my chores for a day or two. I did not think I would be able to find it again. It opens into a much longer cavern within the hill. I'll show you later. Evan struggled to keep his eyes open. The pounding in his head grew louder and louder. He grimaced with pain in his mouth, and put his hands over his face. Then he slipped back into the sleep. When he woke again, it was to the cool touch of his uncle's hand upon his brow. "You have a fever, lad," Uncle Morgan said, a line of worry creasing his forehead. A thin shaft of sunlight pierced the cave from its entrance. Was it mid-morning? Uncle Morgan had managed to build a small fire, but the warmth, which Evan would have welcomed a few hours earlier, now seemed oppressive. He wanted to inch away from it, but found that his muscles would not obey. Uncle Morgan wet his hands on the damp wall and gently patted Evan's face. "Your skin is on fire," he said. "Rest now, if you can." Evan stared at his uncle's face. The handsome details of the clever gray eyes and the smiling lips blurred, and he could only make out the pale skin framed by black hair. A shearing pain filled Evan's mouth. He closed his eyes, and within moments, a dizzying sleep overtook him again. He felt lost, tumbling in the blackness for a long time. This time he dreamed of rain hitting his face like icy needles and something burning in his mouth. Let me ask you guys a question. Heads up, Ori. Who here has ever had a fever? Everybody can raise your hand. We've all had a fever.
I haven't done
Okay.
it, so.
Do you know what happens when you have a fever? You get really hot, and it's actually your body's response. So here's what's happening. There's some kind of bacteria or something in your body, a virus, bacteria, or something. Do you know why you get a fever?
Why?
Your body is actually trying to defend you. Your body will raise the temperature to try and kill whatever virus or bacteria or thing that's in your body. It's actually your body's response to kill it. Okay? Now sometimes it's able to do that, and that's why you'll get a fever, and then it'll go away, because that's like your body's, it killed the virus. So it goes back down. Now, why do you think his body's making him have a fever? Think about all that happened. What do you think might have happened, Nazir? Okay, go to the bathroom. Nick, why do you think?
Probably because his tongue got cut off.
Because his tongue got cut off. Okay? What you guys don't understand is nowadays, if you get sick or you get cut, hey, not a big deal. Go to the doctor. They'll give you some medicine. That'll take care of you fine. Not during this day. Okay? If you got a cut, whether it was just a cut on your arm or something got cut off, bacteria would get in there and would infect it. Sometimes your body would be able to kill it, raise your temperature. Other times, it couldn't, and your body would just keep raising the temperature up and up and up and up until you die. Because it could not fight off that bacteria. But there was no, like at the time, medicine like there is today. Today, if that happens, they're just like, hey, don't worry about it. Here's some antibiotics, take these pills, you'll be fine. So right now, really the worry is if he's even going to survive. Okay? So let's keep reading. Much later, Evan heard a dim voice. "Nephew, I was fearful over you. It was in my mind that you might die before the sun set again. You have spent a long day and night, and then again a day, burning with fever." So he's been out laying there for like 2 whole days, going to sleep and in and out. Like he didn't even know. He just woke up and he's like, "What happened?" He's like, "You've been sleeping for 2 days, bro." Like, that's how long he was sitting there. His body was trying to fight this. Evan turned his head and focused his eyes with difficulty. "Nephew, how do you fare?" Uncle Morgan asked in a low voice. Evan stirred a bit, too weak to turn over on his side. He opened his mouth to speak. He wanted to say that he felt a little better, but the noise that came from his throat was gargled. So he's like, when he tried to say something, he's like, "Oh." That's all he heard. His mouth felt so odd, as if his tongue had become a piece of wood. He was confused and tried to speak once more, but he stopped abruptly as he saw Uncle Morgan's face contort into disgust. Then suddenly Evan remembered they had cut out his tongue. he could speak no more. The sons of Griffin had no right to do this to him. They had no right! The words screamed in Evan's brain and remained there, chained within the walls of his skull. To be maimed like a slave was a humiliation too great to bear. So in other words, guys, in this time, and this shows you how different this time is from now. If you were a slave, you remember how earlier they had slaves' quarters, and that's some slaves that would walk around and had to do everything?
Yeah.
When you became a slave, they cut out your tongue. And it showed a sign that you are a slave now, and you are owned by someone else, so that they could not even communicate
Why
or
did
talk.
you paint a thing on the shoe?
But remember, let me point this out also. Can Evan read?
No.
So if he can't read, can he write?
No. No. You can't
So I want you to imagine this. Imagine one day you're normal, you're talking to your friends, doing all this stuff. Then the next day, you can't talk, you can't write, you can't communicate with anybody. So literally what he's saying here is like he's trapped in his own head now. And he can't communicate or talk to anyone. Because he can't write, he can't say like, hang on a second, let me write this down. You know, can you give me food? Like, he can't even do that. He literally has no way to communicate at this point. Question?
He's already gonna.
He can do emotions like that, but he has no way to really communicate. He can do basic stuff like hungry, thirsty, that's all he can do. He can't have a conversation. Yep.
How are you eating and drinking stuff now?
Ooh, you're about to find that's coming up next. Just go ahead.
And how can you not talk without a tongue? Like right now, wait.
Your
right
tongue
now-
is how you can communicate. But every time you're talking, your tongue is nonstop moving in your mouth. Take that completely out, and you can make maybe sounds, but you can't talk like this without your tongue. Yep.
To the next to the book, I kept checking on my tongue at night. And two.
All right, hold on. We're going to go a few questions coming up, okay? All right, guys, heads up. Some people are heads down. If you can't stay awake, I'll have you stand up at the desk, okay? Okay, yeah? Thanks, sir. To be maimed like a slave was a humiliation too great to bear. It was true that his father had not been wealthy or of high rank, but he had been free, protected by the laws which served all free men. His father lay dead and unburied. His uncle Brandon, an outlaw, no doubt, and he, Evan, had been shamefully mutilated to speak no more. It was beyond his understanding. Why had they killed him as they killed his father? Uncle Morgan jumped to his feet and left the cave without looking back. Evan saw his hair shine in the sunlight briefly before he disappeared. As he heard the clip-clop of the horse making his way down the trail, Evan closed his eyes in despair. His uncle was ashamed of him. He was deserting him. He would leave him here to die all alone. Evan felt empty and exhausted. Then once again he fell into a deep sleep, but this time it was one who has no reason to wake. Question real quick, why would his uncle leave? Let's get some answers. Why would his uncle just get up? He's sitting there, obviously. Your nephew just lost his tongue. Obviously, if you just lost your tongue, you're probably devastated. And so his uncle's response was, just leave. Why?
I didn't want to see his nephew die.
Okay, so maybe he's worried he doesn't want to have to sit there and see him die.
Maybe the brothers are hunting him down and he says, nope, I'm not being killed.
Okay, so maybe he's still worried about the Griffin brothers tracking him down. Talk.
About two. One, probably because he's ashamed of Evan.
Okay.
Two, probably because he just doesn't want to like watch him suffer or just look at him like that.
Yeah. So remember earlier when he tried to talk, Evan tried to talk, it said his uncle looked at him with disgust. Because obviously he realized what had happened, and now that he realized his nephew was literally like a slave. Because they had literally taken his tongue out. It was a huge humiliation. Okay. Do you have a question? Keith, why did he leave? Okay, so you were saying Tom might kill his uncle and then just think Evan's a slave because he doesn't have a tongue, right? That's what slaves have. Okay? Let's read and find out. But he did wake several hours later, and Uncle Morgan was there again, squatting by Evan's side and eating a bit of coarse bread. He faced a newly built fire, but turned as Evan shifted his weight. Taking a small loaf of bread from a pouch at his side, he moistened it with some water. "Chew this slowly," he said, handing it to Evan. "It will make you feel better." Evan saw his uncle's kindness, but he felt a coolness in his manner. He sat far away from Evan and avoided his glance, like wouldn't look at him. When he spoke, he stared into the fire. When he handed him the bread, he was careful that Evan's fingers should not touch his. But his words were warm and sweet, and he talked long into the night. Now and then, he would forget and ask Evan a question. Then there would follow an embarrassed silence till Uncle Morgan covered his mistake with foolish talk. "I have a friend, Evan, who lives in the village on the east edge of the woods. He's agreed to go to Raiwallow's den and see that your father is buried with the rest of the family." Uncle Morgan snapped a twig and fed it to the fire. "As for us, nephew, perhaps we can turn our misery into something better. Perhaps you knew that I had run away to live with some Saxon English. I worked on a large estate as a stable hand. We will go there to find work. Griffin's sons will think that we were vanished into the hills. We'll be safe there, and we'll be free." Evan watched Uncle Morgan as he spoke. He had the charmer's way about him, his eyes sparkling with hope, his voice light with excitement. But Evan also noticed that when Uncle Morgan uttered the word free, he seemed uneasy. Why do you think when he said the word free, he was kind of uneasy? Like he's like, "It'll be great. We'll go there and we'll have fun. We'll make a lot of money, and we'll be free." That's weird, right? Why do we do that, Nazir?
Because they're free but not free, and because he like doesn't. I don't know how to say it, put it in words. It's like he thinks that now that Evan got his tongue cut off, he thinks Evan is a slave.
Ooh, so maybe he's like already equating Evan with like a slave because his tongue's cut out, so he's kind of weird about saying free around Evan. That's good. Okay, so maybe he's like worried still when he says free, but also the Griffin brothers still hunting us, so he's kind of uncertain.
Is this real glass?
It's a type. It's not like glass like a window, but it's just a different type.
So, his uncle might be embarrassed to see him with him because people might be like, "Hey, is that your slave?"
So
And
definitely.
then he said free like that because Evan, since his tongue cut off, he can't say nothing to nobody to say he's not a slave. So then people might treat him like a slave.
Very much could be. Before you guys answer that, let me ask you this, okay? Let's say your whole life you were like told, "Hey, guess what?
You're a slave.
You're free. Like you have rights, laws that'll protect you." Heads up for me. Heads up. Laws that'll protect you. And you're like, "Yeah, I am free. I'm protected. I got laws." But then one day, somebody comes and steals your car. And you're like, "How dare they steal my car? I am a free man. I have laws that protect me. I'm going to go get this fixed." And you go to the court, and you go tell a police officer, like, "Hey, this man stole my car." And they were like, "What man was that?" And you're like, "This man." You took a picture of him. He's like, "Here." And the guy looks at it, and he goes, "Oh, that's the mayor's son." And you're like, "Okay. You know who he is. Go get him." The police officer's like, "No, I'm not getting the mayor's son." You're like, "But he stole my car. I'm a free man. I'm his law. The law says you have to do this." He's like, "Yeah, nah, that's too much trouble. I'm not going to do that." So now, would you feel the same way free you did before? Now you'd be like, Okay.
Are you kidding me?
I'm not as free as I thought I was. So right here, the uncle before all this thought, I'm a free man. Laws will protect me. But the Griffin brothers showed him, yeah, that's cute. We can still do whatever we want you. You don't really have any rights. So now, do you think when he says free, the uncle's thinking more about it like, am I really free? Do we really have the same rights? Obviously, the Griffin brothers showed us we don't. So I think there's some internal conflict where he's trying to think through this and being like, I don't think we'll ever really be free. Because there's still people that can just do what they want, and we can't do anything about it. Okay? Let's keep reading. After a short silence, Uncle Morgan added, perhaps you can work as a stable boy. In your spare time, you can master the weapon skills with the boys who are training in the housecarls. A good fighting man can always earn his bread. Evan smiled, picturing himself as a housecarl. He had seen a battle axe only once in his life and had barely been able to lift it with both hands. He held up his arm for Uncle Morgan to see, placing a finger around his bicep. Uncle Morgan laughed. No, perhaps not a housecarl, but surely you will find your place somewhere. Evan took a bite of the bread, chewing it slowly. It had little taste, as if the cook had had no salt to add. Then he realized something. Ready, guys?
Yes.
His wound would make eating a joyless chore. Chewing was clumsy, and Evan felt painfully aware of how foolish he now appeared. So, guys, more and more Evan is starting to see, like, this, like, ruined my life. One, we already knew they stole his feature. He couldn't talk anymore, right? He wanted to be a storyteller. Now we know it was also a sign of a slave. But now imagine this. Who loves food?
Everyone,
Who loves food?
all of us raise our
We all love the taste of food. We love all different types of food, love Mexican food, pizza, burgers. Now, imagine, put your head here, you could taste nothing. You could never taste pizza. You can never taste taco. You can never taste a burger. You can never taste cake. You can never taste ice cream. You still have to eat because you have to live, but you can't taste anything.
I'm keeping my tongue.
More and more, Evan is seeing again and again, like, this has changed my whole life. And not for the better, all for the worse. Yep.
I don't know how to hold on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
We have to keep reading this and making me uncomfortable.
We'll keep going for a little bit. All right. When he swallowed, it was like rocks scraping his throat. But his stomach was empty for so long and was grateful, and he slowly took another bite and then another until the bread was gone. That night, Evan dreamed of the Griffin sons. They had returned to kill him. One knelt on his chest as the other raised his dagger. Evan flailed helplessly under the weight while villagers gathered around him. He screamed for help, but there was no sound, and no one came to his aid. As the knife swung down, Evan woke, suddenly gasping for breath. The blackness of the cave surrounded him. His chest heaved as though he'd run a long way. The fire had burned down to embers, and he shivered in the night air. Gazing at the mouth of the cave, he searched for movement. Were they out there? He strained his ears to catch sound of footsteps outside, but heard only his uncle's gentle snore. He stared at Morgan, his brain slowly clearing to wakefulness. He checked the mouth of the cave once more. It was empty. There was no one there now. But Evan feared they would come. They would kill him. He lay awake the rest of the night, watching and listening, his heart pounding against his ribs, until, when dawn finally broke, he slept. We're going to stop here. Oh gosh.